In 1954, the United States government helped overthrow a democratically elected president, not because he was a threat to America, not because he had weapons, not because he had attacked anyone, but because he threatened the profits of a fruit company. A fruit company. This is the story of how one corporation bought a country, rewrote its laws, and called in the most powerful military on earth to protect its bananas, and why the effects of that decision are still being felt today. To understand what happened in Guatemala, you have to understand United Fruit. In the early 1900s, United Fruit Company was not just a business, it was a government. At its peak, it owned 42 ships, its own railway network, its own telegraph system, and more land in Central America than some countries had in total. In Guatemala alone, United Fruit controlled 42% of the entire country's land. They paid almost no taxes. They paid their workers almost nothing. And if any government tried to change that, United Fruit had a very specific solution. They called it diplomacy. But it wasn't diplomacy. It was something much darker. And to see how dark, we need to go to 1950, when Guatemala made the mistake of electing the wrong president. His name was Jacobo Arbenz. He was a military officer turned politician who believed in one radical idea, that the land of Guatemala should belong to the people of Guatemala. In 1952, he launched a land reform program. The government would buy unused land from large landowners at the value those landowners had declared for tax purposes and redistribute it to 100,000 peasant families who had nothing. It was not communism. Private property was protected. Compensation was paid. But United Fruit owned 550,000 acres of unused land in Guatemala, and the Guatemalan government offered them $627,000 in compensation, exactly what United Fruit had declared that land was worth on their own tax forms. United Fruit said the land was worth $16 million. The same land they had been telling the government was worth $627,000 for decades. They couldn't have it both ways. But United Fruit wasn't going to argue in a courtroom. They were going to argue in Washington, and they had exactly the right people to make that call. The Secretary of State at the time was John Foster Dulles. His former law firm had written United Fruit's contracts with Guatemala. The director of the CIA was Allen Dulles, his brother. Allen Dulles had previously served on United Fruit's board of directors, the Assistant Secretary of State for Inter-American Affairs, a former United Fruit lobbyist. United Fruit didn't need to bribe anyone. The people making decisions were already their people. The company launched a massive public relations campaign, calling Arbenz a communist, calling Guatemala the next Soviet state, calling the land reform a threat to the entire Western Hemisphere. None of it was true. But in 1954, at the height of the Cold War, truth was not the most important thing. Fear was. In June 1954, the CIA launched Operation PBSuccess. A small army of mercenaries trained and funded by the United States invaded Guatemala. Within 2 weeks, Jacobo Arbenz was gone. He resigned. He was exiled. He spent the rest of his life moving from country to country: Mexico, Cuba, Uruguay, France. A man without a home, because he tried to give homes to people who had none. But the story doesn't end there. What came after was worse. The government that replaced Arbenz was a military dictatorship, and then another, and then another. For the next 40 years, Guatemala experienced a civil war that killed an estimated 200,000 people. Indigenous Mayan communities were systematically massacred. The United Nations later called it genocide. The land reform was reversed. The peasant families lost what little they had. United Fruit kept its land. In 1984, the company, now renamed Chiquita Brands International, was still operating in Guatemala. In 2001, a lawsuit revealed that Chiquita had paid $1.7 million to a Colombian paramilitary group designated as a terrorist organization by the United States government. The same company, different name, same methods. And the people of Guatemala? Today, Guatemala has one of the highest rates of chronic malnutrition in the world. Nearly half of all children under 5 years old are chronically malnourished in a country with some of the most fertile land on Earth. Land that a fruit company decided was more valuable as profit than as food for the people living on it. The term Banana Republic, a phrase used to describe corrupt, unstable, exploited nations, was coined specifically because of what United Fruit did in Central America. We use it casually now, as an insult, as a joke, but it describes something real, a country hollowed out by a corporation that needed cheap land, compliant governments, and workers who had no choice, and a superpower that provided the muscle whenever the business model was threatened. Jacobo Árbenz wanted to give land to 100,000 families who had nothing. For that, he lost his country. And those families, they're still waiting. If this made you angry, or if you think the full story is more complicated than this, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want to know about the next company that bought a country, follow along. There are more where this came from.